All right, 5th and 6th grade, welcome back to class. We're going to start off with our sniglet of the week. This is Snooty Kit. Can you see the two words that are included here? I thought this was great. Snooty, like being snooty, sticking your nose up in the air. And etiquette, Snooty Kit, is a noun. I'm going to even do this. This is how I like to think of the sniglets. Etiquette. So Snooty Kit is a noun. It means upgrading one's table manners in direct proportion to the prices on the menu. I don't know if you've ever been to a fancy restaurant, or at least fancier than maybe a drive-through or fast food, and all of a sudden you feel the need to have some manners that maybe you don't normally use. You sit up taller and you try to stick out your pinky. I know that I have done this for sure. Sometimes it's not even at a restaurant. Sometimes it's just when certain people are around. All of a sudden I'm very aware of my table manners. Snooty Kit. All right, our Shakespeare of the week is a phrase, neither here nor there. That is a phrase from the play Othello by Shakespeare. And if you haven't heard this one, you will now that you're aware of it. It's neither here nor there, or sometimes people use it as an expression of kind of like, well, whatever, neither here nor there. Then our Proverbs of the day about words is Proverbs 15:4. A wholesome tongue is a tree of life, but perverseness in it breaks the spirit. A wholesome tongue. It's just a good reminder to remember how powerful our words are. This is talking about the life-giving property of your tongue, but also how it can just break the spirit. So how do you want your tongue to affect people, your words? Do you want to breathe life or to break spirits? Break their spirits. It just means to discourage them, to encourage them or discourage them. How do you use your words? Now we're going to enter into the bulk of our discussion today. And we are going to talk about flow within a paragraph. So what I did is I took the same paragraph we used last week and I snuck a sentence in there. Now, before you go looking for my added sentence, I'm going to explain why I did this. So when we write a paragraph, when we first start writing, it's easy to think that you should just write anything that comes to your mind. But that would be very poor writing. And it's poor writing because your reader will have a difficult time following along. You have to remember that when someone reads something instead of listening to you say it, there's no inflection, there's no pausing, there's no dramatic emphasis. Everything is dependent upon the words that you choose, and that is it. It's silent. So the reader, if the words do not stand on their own, if they cannot express what you are trying to communicate on their own, then a lot can be lost. So one of the rules of writing is making sure that your paragraph logically flows from one sentence to the next, one idea to the next. And not just sentence to sentence, but paragraph to paragraph. But we're going to focus on just sentence to sentence today. One of the very easy ways to do this is to kind of think of it like a choo-choo train. Each sentence should hook on to the previous sentence in some way. There should be some sort of match, I like to think of it. So I'm going to demonstrate on this paragraph, and hopefully you'll see where the train derails with the sentence I added in. So we're going to just read it together, and I'm going to point it out as we go. When Mrs. Frederick C. Little's second son arrived, everybody noticed that he was not much bigger than a mouse. Now, the first link to the next sentence, let me turn on my pencil. It's going to be the truth of the matter was. This is an idea that actually links back to everybody noticed. But it also links back with the word mouse. We're still talking about the mouse. Now that may seem obvious. Well, yes. We talked in the past couple weeks about the importance of having your subject of your topic sentence be the subject of your paragraph or your paper. And so we're going to come back to this in a second. But it also needs to link to every sentence in the paragraph needs to point back to the subject. So it should be still about the mouse. The next sentence, he was only about 2 inches high. And he had a mouse's sharp nose, a mouse's tail, a mouse's whiskers, and a pleasant, shy manner of a mouse. So first, the way we link these two is he was like a mouse in every way. And then he immediately describes how he's like a mouse. He, in every way, he was 2 inches high. So he's like him in height. He's like him in his nose, his tail, his whiskers, his manner. He was still a mouse. This one links back very well. Okay? And I'm counting this whole compound sentence as one sentence. Then the very next sentence is also really good because it shows a transition in the paragraph. We're kind of moving forward now. Before he was many days old, he was not only looking like a mouse, because, right, didn't we just talk about how he looks? But now we're talking about how he acts, but acting like one too, wearing a gray hat and carrying a small cane. Now, if you read this very closely and you have your thinking cap on, you would say, but wait a minute, most mice do not wear a gray hat and carry a small cane. And you would be right. So he is kind of saying this tongue-in-cheek now because an imaginary mouse family might look like this and act like this. All the mice that you know in history, in your stories, maybe from Beatrix Potter, maybe from, what are some of the old mice stories that would have been around? Lots of Mother Goose and things like that. So you probably didn't say, wait a minute, mice don't act like that. You probably actually thought, oh yeah, that's what mice do. They act like a mouse, or Sherlock Holmes mouse. There's all kinds of fictional mice. But here, wearing a gray hat and carrying a small cane probably didn't make you think twice. Then, the cane was from a small dollhouse in the attic. Uh-oh. Now, I did this one a little bit tricky. I included the cane, so you might get sidetracked and think that it was a real sentence. But this sentence is actually not in the original, because all of a sudden I start talking about the cane. It's almost like the cane reminds me of something, and it's like, oh yeah, there's a cane, and he used it from the small dollhouse in the attic. That actually is not relevant to what he's saying. We don't need to know that. Maybe if he had written that he would have said, carrying a small cane, borrowed from the dollhouse in the attic, as a side note. But he certainly wouldn't take a whole sentence to talk about a cane. It's like, kind of like squirrel, where you get distracted about something you see. Cane, where the cane is from, actually has nothing to do with the description of the mouse. Do you guys see that? So that was the sentence I added in. Did you like that sentence? And then it says, Mr. and Mrs. Little named him Stuart, and Mr. Little made him a tiny bed out of 4 clothespins and a cigarette box. Now, if this were your paper, I might even say, why don't you add a sentence in here? Why do we go from the cane to Mr. and Mrs. Little? Well, what he's doing, the author is circling back all the way to the topic sentence where he says they had a new son. And what he's concluding here is that Mr. and Mrs. Little's new son, they didn't treat him like a mouse. So he looked like a mouse, he acted like a mouse, but they did not treat him like a mouse. What did they treat him like? They treated him like a child. So I might even explicitly say that here. So I might add in here, if I were editing this, I'd say, let's add in this sentence. Just like I said, he may have looked like a mouse, but Mr. and Mrs. Stewart, Mr. and Mrs. Little, treated him like, and you might expect a mouse, but no, their son. They treated him like their son. And then that would pick up. They named him Stuart, and Mr. Little made him a tiny bed out of 4 clothespins and a cigarette box. Because he wasn't a mouse, he was their son. He lived with them. So that is a really beautiful paragraph, even without my addition. We don't need my addition. But this is a great paragraph. So sometimes what we do when we write is we start off on a subject and then we just kind of ping off of it and kind of like we talk sometimes, like, oh yeah, that reminds me, my neighbor got a pet mouse. And speaking of pets, Dad said we could get a cat someday. Oh, and we kind of do that when we write, and it's very hard to follow. And the other thing we tend to do sometimes when we write is we might have a bucket, and we think, well, as long as it has to do with my subject, I can put it in the bucket. So if my subject is about mice, well, then I can talk about my pet mouse. I can talk about the mouse I saw one time when I was 3. I can talk about how my neighbor has a problem with mice and they got cats. And so anything that has to do with mice can go in the bucket. And it doesn't matter what order. That is not how we write paragraphs. Your paragraph has to be so well written that I cannot rearrange the sentences in any other order. So I also want to point that out in this paragraph. So I have, this is my first sentence, and this is my second sentence. My third sentence is here. 4 is here. 5 is here. Now, if I were to try to even switch this around, it shouldn't make sense. If I've written this well, let's try it. He was only about 2 inches high, and he had a mouse's sharp nose, a mouse's tail, a mouse's whiskers, and a pleasant, shy manner of a mouse. When Mrs. Frederick C. Little's second son arrived, everybody noticed that he was not much bigger than a mouse. Mr. and Mrs. Little named him Stuart, and Mr. Little made him a tiny bed of 4 clothespins and a cigarette box. The truth of the matter was the baby looked very much like a mouse in every way. If I rearrange the sentences, it doesn't flow like it did. In fact, it has a different emphasis too. This one made it sound like they treated him like a baby, but they shouldn't have because he was a mouse. So how you organize your sentences matters. All right, so let's get to our assignment. So what I want you to do is something that may seem very easy at the front, but I really want you to take time to do this homework well. So first of all, I want you to take the edited paragraph that you wrote last week and that your parent or teacher edited for you, and I want you to produce a clean copy of that paragraph. So sit down, take time, all the mistakes that they found, the things they want you to change, go ahead and change them. Then I want you to go through and I want you to make sure that each sentence in your paragraph is essential, and not only essential, but in the right order. 1, 2, 3 order. In other words, look at it. Sometimes I rearrange my paragraphs because I realize my topic sentence really is the 3rd sentence down. Maybe that one would make a better topic sentence. Or maybe the point I'm trying to make should go at the end and not at the beginning. So take the time to organize it, maybe add in a couple phrases to link each sentence to each other. like these phrases, like the truth of the matter, or where he added in here, not only, but also he looked like one. So add in phrases like that that string your sentences together and help them transition smoothly. And then if you find that it isn't organized well, which I'm just going to give you a heads up, it's your paragraph will need to be edited in this way. There's no way you can write a paragraph that flows perfectly the very first time. I can't do it. You can't do it. Nobody can do it. It needs to be evaluated and rearranged, and a few words added here and some taken out there. So I shouldn't say if it isn't. I should say because it isn't. Take time to correct or delete those sentences. But also look for any sentences like the one I added in here. Do you have any sentences in your paragraph that really just are unnecessary? They're fluff, they're extra. They really don't have anything to do with your paragraph. Nothing will be lost if you delete them. So delete it. But then when you've made your paragraph really perfect as you can get it, then I want you to add in one sentence that's kind of related, but it's kind of like the one I added. It's kind of like, oh wait, that reminds me, I blah, blah, blah. I want you to add in that one rogue sentence. And then your parent or teacher is going to see if they can identify it. And let's see if they can. If you wrote your paragraph well enough, then they will be able to spot it. Now, if you write a totally silly sentence, excuse me, I was yawning, a totally silly sentence off the wall, well then, of course, they'll find it. I want you to try to pick something that's related but not essential and see if they can spot it, okay? So this assignment for this week is going to be several points. It depends on how many marks your teacher made. If your teacher made 20 marks on your paper, then you have 20 things to correct for a clean copy. And then when you go to make sure your sentences are connected and essential and in the right order, and you delete any extras, that is an extra 5-point portion. And so it needs to be a different a cleaned up paragraph, even from your clean copy. And then lastly, there will be 5 points for this sentence that you add in if it's not off the wall, number one, and if, number two, it's related but not essential to your story, kind of like a tangent. You would be surprised at how many writers, even adult writers, find themselves going on these rabbit trails, as we call them, and add in a sentence or two that really doesn't have anything to do with their topic sentence. It's very easy to do. But if you practice doing it the wrong way, it helps you learn how to spot it. Okay, so the total points for this assignment will be probably around 30, but again, it depends on how many corrections you have here. Okay, great job. I will see you next week.